We would not be able, we would, that's a little pop-up. You would have seen a pop-up. So this will be recorded, so the information we're presenting can be shared with others as needed. We do have about an hour, just under an hour, 45 minutes to an hour planned for this evening. So thank you very much for your time. What we'll do now is I'll turn it over to Lorraine Stewart, our board chair, for some introductions of the board members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I am delighted to do that. A warm welcome to all of you who are here tonight. And we have trustees here to listen to the conversation, to hear your perspectives, hear your questions, hear your comments, all the information that's very important to help us determine our way forward with this recommendation. And so in the room tonight, and I won't go on that screen, I'll go in my notebook. We have Vice Chair Ann Montgomery, and we have trustees Eric Cameron, Trustee Amy Hennig, Trustee Aileen Wagner, and Trustee Paul McCann, and myself, Lorraine Stewart. So trustee who is not here yet tonight and thought she would hopefully be able to come would be Trustee Jill Osborne. So you may see Trustee Osborne in later. So I will turn it back to you then, Mark, and take it away, or Shauna. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Good evening, everybody. I'm Shauna Boyce. I'm the superintendent of schools here for Parkland School Division. I want to just take a minute and introduce the executive members and other administration members here this evening. And then I'm going to jump into a little bit of a history, and then I will turn it back over to other folks to walk through the presentation. So you met Mark already, Mark Francis. Mark is our deputy superintendent with Parkland. Also on the call tonight is Associate Superintendent Scott McFadden. Scott will also be contributing to the presentation this evening, as well as Associate Superintendent Scott Johnston. And Associate Superintendent Meg Miscolzi is also here this evening. So that's our executive team. The most important person here from administration, however, is in my top left-hand corner of my screen anyway, is, so apologies if it's somebody else on yours, is Jordy Weedman. He is our Director of Strategic Communications. He is the guy who is involved in almost every one of our conversations that executive and board has. So I will start. I'll very briefly talk a little bit about how we ended up where we are here tonight to give you a bit of the background. Then, like I said, I'll turn it back over to Mark and Scott, and they will start with some of the information before we get to the point where the most important part of the night is actually hearing directly from parents. So this all started we're coming up on a year and a half ago now, in January of 2021, at which time the board of the day directed administration, so me and my team, to conduct attendance area and school utilization reviews for the Parkland School Division. So to take a look at all of the schools. And so what we did is we hired a consultant, so some experts, to go in and be able to look at population growth, community growth, utilization of schools, and so to come up with some recommendations of ideas of things that we could examine and could take care of or could look into regarding attendance areas, especially in some of our areas like the city of Spruce Grove, where many of the schools are very full. In February of this year, so that report from the consultants came back in January of 2022, so just a few months ago now. And then in February of 2022, the board took a look at all of those recommendations. There were a number of considerations for to review, and the board reviewed all of those and decided which ones they would direct administration to explore further. And that's where we are, is in the process of exploring further all of those recommendations that if you want to, we'll point it out later, you can see on our website. In March of this year, Copperhaven and Legacy Park, or specifically Legacy Park residents who attend Copperhaven School, were engaged in a conversation around them and where they could attend school next, starting not this coming up fall, but the fall after that. And tonight, we are here tonight with McLaughlin neighborhood residents to have that, to have a similar conversation. So that's where we've been. It's been quite a while in the process, and there's still plenty of work to do. And like, I just want to make sure that we make it clear that tonight is part of that exploration. No decisions have been made. What we're doing is trying to make sure that we gather all the information that we can. And so with that background information, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark, who will take a look, walk you through the rest of our slides so that we can quickly get to your conversation. So thank you again for coming, and there you go, Mark.
Okay, so I'll go through some few slides. Some of them I'll go through fairly fast so we can get to the meat and potatoes, what we want to talk about today. We do have about 25 minutes of slides, and then there's an opportunity to share, ask questions, share information, and then that'll bring us right to hopefully 7:15, 7:30 at the latest. So like Shauna said, we're actually we've been at this for a while. And so there's a number of recommendations. The original report by the consultants had a lot of recommendations covering all of the school division. The ones that, of course, impact Spruce Grove, it looks at, and actually it was passed today at the board meeting today, is converting Parkland Village to a K-5 school and not directing those grade 5 students to Prescott School. Recommendation A, option 3, was then to look at those grade 6 students when they finish at Parkland, and then instead of Prescott, go to Woodhaven. Jordy, go ahead to the next slide. We also had the original recommendation was students in the West Central ASN development area in Spruce Grove, specifically Legacy Park as the only developed area, would be, instead of going to Copperhaven, would be directed to Brookwood and Woodhaven. In addition, there would be additional modular units installed at Copperhaven. We did, I put these are recommendations the board did not pursue, but I think they're worth mentioning, is these options, option E, was really a comprehensive, there was 2 different options, a north-south boundary and an east-west divide. And this really looked at the option of almost putting all the students in Spruce Grove in a blender and redesignating almost all the schools. And of course, as you can well imagine, I don't remember the exact numbers, but we're well over 50% of all students would have been redesignated, which of course would have meant most students, or many students in Parkland, in Spruce Grove in particular, would have been in different schools when this came to pass in 2023. Jordy, go ahead to the next one. And then, of course, there is some recommendations around the West Central and Shiloh. These are really, for the most part, other than one neighborhood called Legacy Park, have no houses in them, and it would be directing those to Woodhaven, and I'll show where those are on the map in a little bit. Go ahead. And then, of course, the big is this is a huge part of it, is also working with the province and the city of Spruce Grove to really recognize that we have 2 areas that are actually in need of new schools. One on the east end and one on the west end. And again, I'll point it out when we come to the map, but really what it is Spruce Grove, like other rapidly growing cities in the province of Alberta, and Spruce Grove, of course, is one of the fastest growing cities in Alberta, but other communities like Beaumont, Airdrie, that have a disproportionate growth rate. What is really happening is the new neighborhoods are developing faster than infrastructure has been in place to accommodate those students in regards to schools. And so in addition to this, whatever changes we make, the board has recognized that there's a desperate need for a new school in both on both west and east side as well. I would also say, so here's the Copperhaven attendance area. that shows, of course, the folks here tonight are from the McLaughlin area, which you see just below Heather Glen in the orange. And then you see the current area. And again, I'll come to another map and I'll discuss some of the other areas. But really what it is that area of white just to the left of Legacy Park below Copperhaven. That's all potential development to the tune of hundreds of houses, in addition to the hundreds of houses that are south of Highway 16, in addition to the yet unbuilt hundreds of houses in Harvest Ridge and Copperhaven, is putting strain on Copperhaven's attendance. And with that, what I'll do is I will turn it over to Associate Superintendent McFadden to take us through some of the numbers to set the stage, and then I'll come back and I'll explain where we're at. Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Mark. Did that. So in front of you is a chart of the Copperhaven projected enrollment. You can see the chart is basically looking at the last 5 years, and then it's forecasted out to the year 2031-32. So the current enrollment at Copperhaven is 745. The adjusted enrollment is 755. The difference between the enrollment and the adjusted enrollment is the adjusted enrollment takes into consideration a student's needs for spacing and programming, and therefore is generally a higher number. So in this case, 745 to 755. On the next slide, Jordy, this is a graph of the projected enrollment. And you'll see in the 21-22 year that it is still a relatively full school. It's at 88% utilization. The government of Alberta looks at a school around 85% as being fully utilized, and then gets into consideration for a new school. In 2025-26, that's when the school kind of goes over the maximum capacity. It's at 101.8, and then through the forecast all the way to 2031-32, it has a utilization of 114.56%. So it's definitely forecasted to continue to grow and grow beyond the capacity of the school in the coming years. Next slide. So thanks. This is the same thing for Woodhaven Middle School. So again, it has an adjusted enrollment of 475. And enrollment in this school actually decreases as we look out. So as we get to 2031-32, it drops to 326 enrollments. So it is on a decreasing trend. And next slide is same one, just around the utilization. So currently in 21-22, it sits around 66% utilization. And then I was saying it drops to 326 or 45% utilization going forward. So it definitely has room for growth. And one of the challenges schools find as utilization drops below a certain point, you lose that economies of scales, and it becomes a little more challenging for the administrator to run an effective school with low utilization. And Jordy, the next slide. So this is the same, yeah, thank you, for Brookwood. So Brookwood has an adjusted enrollment of 508 in 21-22. It slightly increases to 551 by 31-32. So it's relatively stable. There's a little bit of growth there, but nothing out of the norm. The next slide just goes through, again, the utilization. It's at 72% in 21-22 and grows slightly to 78% by the end of 2031 and 2032. So with that, I will turn them back over to Mark.
Okay, so really we're here to talk about the Copperhaven recommendation. Like Scott said, we have some space challenges coming at Copperhaven. They're probably not as pronounced as the space challenges we're seeing on the exact opposite side of the city with Prescott, where Prescott is going to exceed capacity next year in all likelihood, and if not the year after that. But it is really the same challenge, and it's the challenge of rapidly growing areas to the point, and when we talk about, we're talking about still undeveloped 400 homes in the Copperhaven and 200 to 400 homes in the Copperhaven and Harvest Ridge area. You have the undeveloped areas that south of the highway by Shiloh. It's called the Shiloh area by the RCMP station, which is hundreds of homes. And so we know these challenges are coming. Go ahead, Jordy, to the next slide. So the original recommendation was to, of course, redesignate West Central and Shiloh, these areas, the area structure plan or ASPs for the city. And of course, those have different names. So West Central includes the neighborhood of Legacy Park. So originally, when a consultant was contracted well over a year ago to look at options, they looked at neighborhoods that could potentially move. And so at that point, Legacy Park kind of stood by itself because it was the only neighborhood in an ASP that had not yet been developed. And so there's hundreds of more homes to be developed there, but it is only the one area, and it holds approximately 40 students. The rest of the undeveloped areas would be sent to Woodhaven and Brookwood, but of course, there's no currently impacted students. Go ahead. So that has obviously begun to look at those undeveloped areas. But of course, we also have to address the utilization rate of Brookwood and Woodhaven. Woodhaven in particular is underutilized. And that, of course, isn't good either if you have a school that's built for 800 and it only has 400 kids in it. That obviously gives us a lot of capacity, and it would impact our ability to go to the Alberta government and say we need a new school in the west or the east, because of course good fit financial planners and fiscal managers at the government level would say, well, you have a school 50% capacity. So part of our need is also to not only lower the over capacity schools, but also raise our under capacity schools. The other thing I would say, just before I launch into the city of Spruce Grove, a quick overview is I got to make it clear, we're also looking at Stony Plain. We have another, and I didn't address what we're doing with Stony Plain. Just because, of course, we're focusing on Spruce Grove, but we actually have a very similar issue with High Park School that's at 100% capacity. And we're looking at some undeveloped areas and moving some already students attending other schools, High Park, to Stony Plain Central, which just, actually is in the process of being built and is due to open in the next year as a much higher capacity. So there's a similar problem, though on a smaller scale, because of course, Spruce Grove is growing at an exponential rate. Just really quickly, this is just a map here. You can see where Copperhaven is. There's the sea there. Of course, we have Harvest Ridge that still has development happening in it. In fact, I believe from the front door, you can see new builds right from the front door of the school. And then, of course, we have in the just south of Copperhaven, in that purple area, there's still a lot of undeveloped housing in there, to the tunes of hundreds of more houses. And then you come down to the gray area just below the purple, and then all the way over to Legacy Park, which is right across Jennifer Heil from Superstore. That area is also slated for development. And though that development may not start in the next 5 years or 10 years even, we also know that we can't predict the pace of development. And the way I've explained it in previous conversations is, if a developer decides to go, we could wake up to bulldozers. They could submit an application because that's already in an area designated for residential. It just takes the developer to start the process. So just on McLaughlin. So of course, everyone's going to say, well, the consultant said Legacy Park. Why are you talking to us in McLaughlin? You got an individualized to come. And what that was is through the process, and I'll show you the numbers here in a bit, we realized that moving Legacy Park, while feasible, it impacts 40 students and it doesn't have a substantial impact. And so through the process, that what we committed to is we would investigate and look at it. What we came to realize is there's a possibility that we may need to look bigger than just one single neighborhood in Legacy Park, and it may need a conversation with McLaughlin. Just for your information, we have about 200 students. What's actually 234 students that attend public school in this area, 200 in K-9. schools, and of course the 34 in the high school that would continue, of course, to go to Spruce Grove Comp. 120 of those attend Copperhaven School. The rest go to either French immersion, actually at Broxton Park. There's other variations, there's other programs at other schools. Go ahead, Jordy. So currently, when we look at the McLaughlin students attending Copperhaven students, we average 12 per grade. You can see the breakdown there. So our math is at approximately 12 per grade. Of course, knowing that there's less in the, maybe at the grade 9 and more at the early childhood. Go ahead, Jordy. So here's the numbers that we've broken down and would like to share with you. So this first one is the original research we did out of the consultants report and was shared with families from Legacy Park. So the top line, current state, no change. What that means is, and you see the colors, 90% capacity is in the yellow color, and red is over 100%. So you look at next year, we're slated to estimate at 785 students. That's above 90% capacity. We continue to go up until 2025, where we have 860 students. So the first option is if we take Legacy Park families and all the students and we send them to Brookwood and Woodhaven, and we do not let them stay, and that's the term legacy. We call them legacy students, and I know it's hard with Legacy Park. And the rationale is the old-fashioned term we used was grandfathering, but grandfathering has some language. It's if you do the research on the words, it's not a good word. So we call them legacy students. So if we were to allow students to no legacy, say, sorry, you can't stay at Copper and you have to go to your new school, we would, of course, we would delay when we are at 100% to 2027, which really is only buying 2 years. So by taking those 40 families and saying, you have to go to your new school, we only get 2 years of grace really before we run out of space. The second option is if we allow all the current students that live in Legacy Park to continue to go to Copperhaven, but any new kids in the area would have to go to Brookwood and Woodhaven. So we allow them to age out. That only buys us a year's time. So, every year, so they average 4 per grade. So 4 kids go out and then another 4 kids go out. It doesn't buy us a lot of time. It actually only delays it for 1 year, that when we hit 100% capacity. We then look at, as we look across other jurisdictions, you could do something like allowing grades 7 to 9 students to stay at Copperhaven, and then K to 6. We do know that moving to schools is very hard, and it's harder, of course, for the older the kids are. So maybe you say K to 6, you've got to go to Brookwood and Woodhaven. 7 to 9 can continue. You see that we delay to 2027. And then there's another option where, of course, you could, no one is legacy, except if there's room. And then, coming up with an average number of kids that would probably suggest want to stay. Again, we get to that 2027 before we hit 100% capacity. So now let's, Jordy. So really, before I get into explaining this next slide, really what it says is the 40 students has an impact, but it's what we would call a low impact, because by moving 40 students, we only gain 2 years. We still have the underlying problem, and that problem is compounded if development goes even faster than we anticipate. And the one thing I would say is I believe Parkland did a boundary review, I'm going to say 6 years ago, prior to the opening of Copperhaven School and Prescott School. And one of the things that we found out when we look back at that data is actually the data, that end of the city developed faster than we anticipated. So the one thing that we always nervous about is that sometimes based on price of housing, based on economic factors out of Parkland's control, we could see an acceleration, which of course makes a 2-year window pretty nervous for us. So then we started looking at McLaughlin. And the reason for looking at McLaughlin is twofold. One is it is physically closer to Woodhaven and Brookwood, and it is you can draw a line and use Jennifer Hiles the line to say on this side of the line you go to Copperhaven, on this side of the line you go to Woodhaven and Brookwood, or Greystone and Millgrove. So there's a dividing line that's natural, and then transportation could be fairly contained within there. So again, the same first line, current projections no change. We're out of space at Copperhaven at 2025. If we were to move all McLaughlin students to Brookwood and Woodhaven, and again, not give the opportunity to stay at Copperhaven, you would drop immediately to 694 students. And at 2031, we'd be in the yellow zone. We'd be at above 90% capacity, but we would not yet be at 100% capacity. But you do get 3 years where you would actually below 90% in the mid 80% range. The second option, the same as the first, is that you just allow all McLaughlin students to stay at their current school. So the board would change the designation of McLaughlin area to Brookwood and Woodhaven, except current students would still be allowed to attend at Copperhaven. And you see that lowers us below the 100%, still keeps us in the 90 north of 90% throughout the next 9 years. Then you have, again, the same option is you allow 7 to 9 to continue at Copperhaven and move K to 6 out. And then you see that there's an immediate drop down to 728, which drops us below 90%. And then you see we climb back up around 2026. And then the last number, the 951, is, yeah, so you see we move back up. That being said, this does give us immediate relief. And then, of course, the last one is the right to choose, which again is a kind of a mathematical guess at how many students. I believe that 951 is actually a typo. That's why I'm confused by it. Because I believe that 951 should say 851. And it still should be orange because the number shouldn't change if we legacy all the students. So that's the error there. So that shows that McLaughlin, by moving McLaughlin instead of Legacy Park, does have a more immediate and larger impact on addressing the overcapacity issues at Copperhaven, and of course would significantly raise Brookwood and Woodhaven's attendance as well. So, and that again is based on 12 students per grade. So I share that information. So go ahead, Jordy, jump to the next slide. So the next steps, the first next step is we're going to have we're going to open up the floor to any questions, comments, and we will, Shauna and I will take some questions and provide some answers, and any of the other board and trustees or the trustees and admin can assist with any providing any additional information. In addition, there will be a survey sent to all potentially impacted people. This is not the only mechanism for engagement. There will be information shared that can be shared with school councils, but there will also be a directly emailed survey to potentially impacted families. So there will be an opportunity to have a robust, there will be a mechanism that you can share your thoughts in much greater detail. We'll continue to do research and collect information. And then there's also, we do also survey students age appropriate. So of course, talking to grade 2s isn't really, but talking to junior high students on their thoughts on transferring schools is something that will be planned in the coming couple weeks. So with that, Jordy, if we could actually just halt the slideshow and just come back on screen. And while I've been talking, I think we're still at the same number of parents. So what we'll do, instead of doing breakout, we will take comments and questions here. What will happen is, feel free just to unmute with the number of parents that we have. And if you have any questions for clarification, so that's the first part. And then we'll go on and Sean will have some more questions. So the first, is there any questions to any of the parents for clarification on any information you've heard? Do you have any questions on the information?
Mark, can I just interrupt for a sec to introduce Trustee Jill Osborne, who is joining us? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm late. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Samantha. So would this be happening for next year if it gets passed? No, this does not come into effect for next school year. This comes into effect the earliest in September 2023. Now, The board did approve a motion that changed Parkland Village to a grade 5 school effective next year, but that is the only recommendation that impacts families that comes into effect. And that's just because if you're going to keep them, it doesn't make sense to send another group out only to pull them back the next year. So no, this would not come into effect until September 2023. Okay. So so the next part, Shauna, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Like I said earlier, the most important part of the evening is hearing from parents to talk a little bit about what this might mean for you and for your children. I want to first acknowledge that nobody wants to consider having to move schools mid-program unless you make that choice yourself. However, the board is tasked with the responsibility of making sure that they effectively utilize the spaces that we have for schools. And so that's why we're having this conversation. It's not about, trying to just make your lives miserable and make you have to make decisions that you didn't want to make. But we do want to make sure, so like Mark said earlier, there will be a survey that gets sent out to all potentially affected parents. So all of the parents in the McLaughlin neighborhoods. And that survey will provide lots of opportunity for sharing information. So I want you to be confident that if you didn't think of it tonight, you will have an opportunity to share your observations and your thoughts later on as well. And so will all of your neighbors who were worried that this meeting might interrupt with the game. So if they couldn't make it tonight, then for sure they will have the opportunity to share that information as well. So the first question we have for you to think about is what concerns, if any, might you have about moving your sons, daughters, children from Copperhaven School to either Brookwood or Woodhaven? Talk to us a little bit about what good things or not so good things that might happen there, that your thoughts are.
Hello, I just wanted to ask, my wife's too quiet to talk. So what grades go to Millgrove and Brookwood schools?
So the two schools in question are Brookwood and Woodhaven. So Brookwood is K-4 and Woodhaven is 5 to 9.
K-4, just K-4?
Yes. Brookwood is K-4, yes.
In Woodhaven?
5 to 9.
Oh, so she wouldn't even.
So no kids will be going to Millgrove?
No.
No.
Millgrove is also a K-4 school, but it is not. We would be looking at the Woodhaven Brookwood combination. Greystone and Millgrove are the elementary and middle school that serves other parts of Spruce Grove.
So Woodhaven is a farther school from McLaughlin than Millgrove, correct?
Yes. Brookwood, yeah. So Brookwood and Woodhaven are right across the road from each other, and then Millgrove and Greystone are on either side of that area. So I know you skip over Millgrove to get to Brookwood, Woodhaven. But
why is that? Is that because Millgrove is full?
It's actually more to do with the attendance area, because of course you have to accommodate for the students in a K-4 school and then a 5 to 9. So students from Millgrove feed into Greystone. So as the city developed, you had a core of Brookwood and Woodhaven, Millgrove, and then Greystone was added in, I think, in the early 2000s to accommodate the initial growth. There is kind of an anomaly because, of course, Brookwood and Woodhaven, you in order to put Millgrove and Woodhaven, you would have kids right across the road from each other. So it is kind of an anomaly that you have a center grouping of schools and then 2 on the outside, and then we have to feed neighborhoods in. We do try to send whole neighborhoods to school. So even though you might have to go to a slightly further away school, it's done so we utilize the full capacity of each of those school buildings.
Okay, so would Prescott, are you guys sending them to Brookwood and Woodhaven too, once they fill up?
Yeah, so one of the recommendations from the Prescott attendance review is to send students from the new developing areas just to the right of PV Mart. And then north all the way to that area developing from 16A right up to where Prescott currently is. That's an area that the board is considering. Actually the mirror image of what we're discussing with you is to send those newly developed areas to Brookwood and Woodhaven as well.
It just sounds like it's a farther area for us to go. And same thing as Prescott, because we looked at buying in Prescott as well as McLaughlin. And we chose McLaughlin due to the fact that the school was a Copper Haven.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've heard that a lot, and we can't, and that's a very valid point you make. And in some cases, we are looking at places where you could see a school from your backyard, but you wouldn't be going to that school. And that is just, and that's really comes down to the physical reality that, we're at the point now. I mean, Prescott, if I use it as an example, we're going to be above 100% capacity. And so, of course, once you get above 100% capacity, there's only two options. One is you put 40 kids per class. Second is probably the option that most school divisions that get into that is you start taking away non-instructional spaces. So you don't have a library, you turn your library into 3 classrooms or 2 classrooms. You start taking away any other instructional space. And even then you run out of space pretty quickly. So yes, absolutely, we hear you. And I can't win the common sense argument. We say, yes, you're closer, but we're going to send you to a farther school. We know that, but we also have that looming capacity issue, what you saw. And
you guys just finished renovating Woodhaven as well.
Yes. And that is the one thing I would say is Woodhaven is a brand new renovated school. One of the things when we renovate schools, there's capacity there. So to accommodate, and the difference between renovating a school and building a brand new one is significantly different. And so we do have the ability to redirect some students there, which utilizes our existing capacity.
I see another option that wasn't mentioned. If the children that are that are in kindergarten to grade 3 at Copper Haven right now, then they could transfer right into Woodhaven at grade 5. You see what I'm saying? That's
Yep.
Another option that wasn't presented.
Okay,
so
we'll make note of that. So just to summarize, I think what that is that you would say that essentially students could, the current students would essentially be allowed to continue, and then they go on to Woodhaven.
Mm-hmm.
And then would you also say part of that, and then I'll go to the other questions in the comments there, would then that any new students to the area would be directed to Brookwood and Woodhaven, or would you, okay, very good. So I just want to make sure I accurately summarize what you said there.
I'm thinking, yeah, you could summarize that, because I think that's a better way, because the kids that are there now could stay till they reach grade 3. Well,
okay.
Grade 4. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yep, I do. We have that recorded. So in the sorry, Shauna, do you want to go ahead?
No, I was just going to, say there's a couple of other points that we need to make. So thank you for that. That's one of those legacy options that we would put in the final report. So thanks for adding that. And we would explore and calculate those numbers out to put in that final report as well. The other piece I think is important to remember is that in addition to moving students into Brookwood and Woodhaven, there is also one of the recommendations was to request another new school in or 2 in Spruce Grove. And so the problem is that does take some time. That request goes to Alberta Education, Alberta Infrastructure, and I'm sure that you've read in the newspaper lately about how long that takes. So that is also one of the ways to alleviate these concerns that the board they have already taken, and it's a matter of making sure that they address these other ones as well. I did want to also go to the chat The Lewis family, thank you for that. Your son doesn't want to move schools again. We fully recognize that there are families in this area who were moved at one point, and now we're considering having the board consider moving again. And I recognize that is not a good thing either. And so then Samantha, your son currently goes to Brookwood. He's supposed to go to Copperhaven next year, and now it's just stressful to think he'd be switching again. I agree that that does add to the difficulty in that if you're switching schools and then for next year and then having to consider switching schools again. That certainly is. And then Andre and Lisa talking about, would you be able to move the kids next year by choice to help with overcrowding? I would commit that operationally speaking, so there's the board who would make decisions as to which neighborhoods go to which schools, frankly. But then operationally speaking, from our perspective, we would make accommodations wherever possible. In some cases, we would have, every once in a while, we have an anomaly where a grade is full. So we might have 33 kids in grade 5, but the rest of the school is not very full. And so if the student happens to be in grade 5, we couldn't necessarily make that move. But generally speaking, if it works, that is something that we certainly would do, is try to address issues like that as they come up and deal with those on a one-to-one, one-offs, I guess that would be a better way of saying it, right? So those are the questions that were in the chat. Those are the comments around moving schools. I just want to make sure that everybody understands we fully, and I know the board members fully comprehend the fact that this is not ideal. Ideally, we would have schools, they would fill up as communities grow, and it would be all seamless and beautiful. But in the city of Spruce Grove specifically, it does not appear to be growing the way that we would like it to grow. It's growing like crazy in some areas and not so crazy in others, and which is why the board has this difficult decision to make.
Shauna,
sorry. Yeah.
could I just jump in there? The other point that may impact actually both of those questions is we do intend to be flexible to the greatest degree, and that's possible. And the reason the board would like to make a decision this year is it allows people then a full year to make some decisions, or even earlier. So for instance, if a school was redesignated from this neighborhood to this neighborhood in 2023, to the greatest degree possible, we would accommodate someone that wants to go early. So if you said, well, why would I go, if I'm supposed to be shifting from school X to school Y, if I could go now, why wouldn't I do it? So for instance, a new student, a new family coming in saying, well, look, if I'm going to start 1 year and then have to go, then I'll just go now. We would support that to the greatest degree possible. And so I don't know if that would, that might be something to Samantha, and maybe even Andre and Lisa, if you're saying, move by choice before it comes into effect, that's something that we could have a conversation about on a one-to-one basis. If indeed the shift gets made.
Right, yes. So then that leads us to our next question is, what are the questions that you would need to get answered before any final decision is made? So like I said earlier, right now we're in the process of gathering information, checking in with families, providing opportunity for families to give the trustees all kinds of input before they make a final decision. And what we're curious about tonight is, what are the questions you have? So one of them is, would transportation prices go up if we choose to go that way? So that would be another question. I understand. I think what you're asking, Samantha, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, is that if your designated school was not was not Woodhaven, and you decided to move your child to Woodhaven, would you have to pay transportation fees for school of choice? And that is part of the ongoing conversation. To what degree can we support that move for individuals prior to the year that if this were brought into effect? So for example, if you wanted to enroll your son or daughter in the Woodhaven school for the 22-23 school year, and the Board of Trustees had voted to to move your area to be designated to Woodhaven, but not till the 23-24 school year, would you need to pay transportation fees, the school of choice fees? That is part of the conversation, the ongoing conversation. And part of that has to do with, do we need to add in an additional bus, or is there room on existing routes? How many students are we talking about? What kinds of opportunities are there? And then again, just in terms of the board is responsible for making sure that we allocate our budget appropriately. And so then that becomes that part of the conversation. So that's, thank you, Samantha. That's the long-winded answer to that is a question to your question, but it is a question that would need to be addressed as we go forward, for sure. That being said, I also would always say to you that, again, when we have one-offs like this, we try to accommodate every need as best as possible, but sometimes reality gets in our way. Would there be dedicated transportation out of McLaughlin to Woodhaven for et cetera? So if you live in a neighborhood that is designated to a school and you attend that school, then there is and that is more than 2.4 kilometers away from the school, then you are provided transportation. So there would be a bus that would go from McLaughlin to Woodhaven and to Brookwood if this area were redesignated to those schools.
If I can just add, Shauna, on those buses, sometimes our buses go through transfer sites, so there's a chance it may not be a direct bus. It might be via transfer site, as a number of our routes do go through transfer sites. So just a clarification, thanks. Yeah,
so there would be transportation to the school. It may not necessarily be a door-to-door. Well, it would be door-to-door, let's put it that way, but there might be a stop in between at a transfer site, as there is in every one of our schools for the most part. Yeah, so transfer station or direct, like Copperhaven, and that may depend on the number of students again, and the routes that are available, and where exactly you live within that community. Are there any other, so those are all good questions that you would need to have addressed in the final report. Any other questions you want to see in that addressed in the final report that we would put to trustees? Also, you just don't feel pressure that you have to ask everything tonight, because like I said, that there will be opportunity through that survey that we send out to share your thoughts as well. And also at the end of the evening tonight, we're going to share an email address that you can just email your free thinking to, if you like. Okay. So we know that we got to this next question earlier tonight, but since we started off on such a good foot, let's see if we can come up with any other ideas as well. The last question I have is, what else needs to be considered, or is there anything that hasn't been considered? And so we talked about changing the Erica, and I'm sorry, I don't know the gentleman's name on the screen, but we talked about perhaps changing the legacy grades to a K-3 or a K-4 rather than, and moving those students at the end of grade 4 over to Woodhaven. So that's certainly something that we would that hasn't been considered and that we can put into our considerations. Is there anything else that you're thinking about?
Hi, I have a bit of a strange question. I was just wondering why Brookwood only goes to grade 4, and why doesn't it go to 6 or something?
That's a really good question. To one, I actually don't have the answer to, other than that is currently the size of the school would not permit too many more grades. It might be fine with K-5, but I can assure you that that one of the scenarios that we look at is how full is that school. It used to be, prior to Prescott and Copperhaven being built, it was the school was huge because we had nowhere else to put those kids. And but that's part of it. Is at the time, the K-4, 5 to 9 was part of a configuration that Parkland School Division determined would be useful and productive. And that's why there is Mill Grove and Greystone kind of pair together in that way. And also now Brookwood and Mill Grove pair together in that way. I do know if we moved it to a K-5 or a K-6, then we run into a problem where that school gets too full and the other schools, I don't know how to describe it, but that's what it is. The question is, when are you hoping to have this passed? Our administration team, so those are those of us that I introduced earlier, we would plan to have this ready for board consideration at a board meeting in June. However, or a special board meeting if needed be. The decision would, the preferred decision-making timeline would be to have the trustees able to make this decision prior to the end of this school year. But again, it wouldn't come into effect until a year from the upcoming September. So September of 2023. That is by design. That's designed to make sure that parents have a whole year to adjust if they wish. Also, having that decision in June gives people the opportunity to switch schools right away if they prefer and if that's feasible, for sure. Anything else? While you're thinking, let me just share one other thing. The trustees are here and they've been very quiet. And that also is because we're here to facilitate the conversation. They really, really want to hear what you have to say. And so that's why they are listening, that I know that I can see them. They're taking notes. They're thinking about this. That's the piece here that we wanted to make sure that trustees were here and were able to hear the conversation and able to then not worry about keeping notes unless they wanted to keep notes for themselves. But so that's why they're so quiet. In my experience, they're not usually like that. Can you tell I'm the one who reports to them? So that's why I have to get in a little jab once in a while when I'm able to. Are there any other questions? Well, then before I turn it back over to Mark, let me just say there aren't very many of you here, but you had some great feedback and some great questions, and I really, truly appreciate that. That will thoroughly inform the next step in our process. And certainly I would like you to encourage your friends and neighbors in the McLaughlin neighborhood to complete that survey that will be coming out. And I'll turn it back over to Mark or Jordy to finish out the evening, and then to talk a little bit also about where you can just email directly. Thank you so much, you guys.
So Sean, I'll just take it first. Sorry, Mark. Just to thank you very much, as Sean has said, for your comments and for your feedback, for giving us ideas that we hadn't thought about before. Very respectful conversation, and it's so important that we do, as trustees, we do hear. That's part of all of the research that administration is gathering. So we do lots of reading and we do lots of listening. And just to remind you, and Mark will probably say this as well, there's no decision made on this recommendation yet. So we are here to listen and gather as much information as we can. So thank you very much to those of you who are here tonight. Thanks.
Hey,
thanks, Mark.
Yes, I was going to say that we really do take the information, and so obviously there was a suggestion made today. Some of us sharpen our pencils and we look at the impact those have, and which is actually why we're meeting here tonight. Is that when we first started looking at it, suggestions came. Well, why this neighborhood, not this neighborhood? Why this area? Which prompted us to look into it. So believe me when I say we do look into your suggestions. and we do try to answer all of your questions, and that will come out in the final report. There is more opportunity. So there's a direct survey that will be emailed to everyone tomorrow. We will be asking for feedback, just like we've done for all the other impact. There will be a survey that says, what do you think? There's an opportunity. Never underestimate the power of the written word. There's also the opportunity to send a direct email to provide feedback to the board. There's two different ways to do it. One is the email address is on the right there. It's board@psd.ca, really quite short and simple. There's also a button right from our web page. If you go to our web page, to the Parkland School Division web page, you see in the upper right-hand corner, attendance area review. It's a quick link button. You push on that. If you scroll down, all the information we've presented here today will be posted. There's a full report of the, as we share information, this is the site will do it. And you click that feedback link, you can actually send an email directly through there. Please encourage your neighbors and friends to share any feedback as well. And then of course, we'll have any additional documents. Jordy will expand that. And you can see copies of the Zoom meeting and any information that we present. So with that, I thank you so much for coming out before the Oilers game here. And we look forward to having a conversation. I would also invite, if you have very specific questions, so for instance, Samantha, if you needed to reach out to our office for specific about your movement of schools and so on, we always are happy to talk with parents and provide any information that we can. Thank you so much, folks. Have a great evening, and go Oilers.
Thanks, everyone.